Can you help me welcome our guests? We're going to bring in Nicolas Africano and Carlos Valladares. I'm a little bit of the master of ceremonies today. I'm Bill Conger, chief curator. I think I know all of you, but if there's somebody here I haven't met, I'm so happy you're here. We are sitting in the second installment of Boy, Joys and Sorrows by Nicolas Africano. The first installment is next door. So I'm gonna make sure you know that. And as we get up and examine the work, don't forget to go next door. It's really kind of the liftoff point. This just opened to the public yesterday, so this is very new, very exciting. Carlos is here with a series of films that are interfacing and having a dialogue with Nicolas's work. And we had Elephant Man last night, which was absolutely brilliant. It was an incredible pairing, and we have a couple more today that you're going to hear about. So please, before we get into the good stuff, can we please help me bring up our president and CEO, John Morris.
Thank you, Bill Conger. Thank you to all of you, the community we call the Peoria Riverfront Museum. Kids, you may not know it, but most people think of a museum as a building or a collection. We think of a museum as people inspiring each other and being inspired by each other. And there's no two better people we could have brought together in our unique national multidisciplinary model: art, science, history, achievement, film society, planetarium, bringing all these tools in the toolbox together to help us do our mission to unleash the full talent and genius of every individual. We're so blessed to have Carlos Valladares, a native of South Central LA, resident of New York, a brilliant film writer, filmmaker, film scholar, to pair up with our very own native son of Illinois, Nicolas Africano, to be all here together in this space with the boy is really special. So on behalf of our board of directors, I want to thank each of you for being members and visionary society members of this unique, privately funded enterprise. Incredible, totally privately, charitably funded museum, unique in the country. I thank you for membership and visionary society members and the kids who are here earning your achievement points to win a trip to New York City. When you go to New York City, if you win the trip, and I hope you do, our Achievement Passport program, the top 10% of people earning these points who come in to all these talks and films and so forth. When you go to New York City, there's one name of an artist who lives here in Central Illinois, who is known throughout all of the arts community in New York City. That's Nicolas Africano, and he's sitting right here. That's pretty cool, isn't it, kids? So for all of you, enjoy what's about to happen uniquely here at the Peoria Riverfront Museum. Thanks to Bill Conger for leading this, and to Everly Davis, our Director of Community Engagement, Matt Duffenbaugh, who found this guy right here to begin with, and to all of you. Have fun. Shall we do it? Bill Conger, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, John. I'm going to extract myself. These guys are well aware of each other. They've had a couple meetings. You've discussed things since you've been here. Nicolas was in attendance for the film last night, so there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to get out of the way. And maybe we could begin by Carlos introducing himself and the film selections, and we can begin a conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. Right, as previously said, I'm Carlos Valladares, critic, filmmaker, curator. And it's one of my distinct pleasures, I think, to bring together like the visual arts and also cinema. because I feel like too often they can seem to feel segregated from one another. That there's something about looking at a painting that requires kind of like more quote unquote intellectual engagement than, for instance, a movie, which we're all kind of conditioned to just see as, entertainment, what's showing down the street, let's go watch it, let's kind of distract ourselves. I think for me and how I've looked at art in general throughout my life, whether it's been reading a book or a poem, whether it's looking at a painting, whether it's watching a movie or a TV show or listening to music, I think it all kind of, or writing about any of them, I think it engages all of the senses in just about the same way. And I think looking at Nicolas's work, which is so kind of, it expresses this really intense and beautiful private language that I'm still kind of unfurling and trying to grapple with, and maybe Nicolas can provide some words as to how he comes up with his ideas. Looking at it, I thought immediately of the 3 films that I've presented this weekend. Yesterday, if you came to see David Lynch's The Elephant Man, we can talk about that. And everyone who came had a very intense, profound emotional reaction, as happens when you watch or rewatch that film. Myself included. And then today we're going to be showing an animated film right after this talk, Isao Takahata's The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, an anime film that was the last film of the legendary Studio Ghibli co-founder Isao Takahata, who ran it famously with Miyazaki. And then at 6:30 we're going to be showing a wonderful children's fable written by Abbas Kiarostami, the great Iranian director, and directed by Jafar Panahi, who won the Best Picture at Cannes this year for his recent film, It Was Just an Accident. The film is called The White Balloon. It's about 90 minutes, and it's really good for the kids, too. It's a very wonderful children's film as well. But I think in going to The Elephant Man, I think what drew me to The Elephant Man when I first kind of encountered your recent series of work, Nicolas, is the sense of like a dream in which the words are extremely familiar. You have sometimes you have dreams in which every single line is blurry, and then you have dreams where every single line is very clear, and yet it's still a dream. There's something that is somehow off in the way that people are saying things, or if words are being communicated, something is off. And I felt that something similar to that when first encountering your work. And I know how interested you are in some of the drawings in the other room are named after, you've called them kind of dream sequences. You've alluded to them as kind of emerging from the place of dreaming. So I wonder if we can start our conversation there about the nature of dreaming for you, and what dreams kind of, how dreams animate your visual work.
Sorry. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm not accustomed to this.
Okay, I got you. There you go.
Thanks. And in fact, this kind of exposure is exactly the opposite of what most of my work is about, which is that if you tried to suggest to identify me as someone, I probably wouldn't know who you were trying to identify. So my sense of self depends on something like that threshold. What I do is to create thresholds for you to step through or not. I don't feel that that's in any sense different than dreams. For me, dreams are a way of defining how we separate our experience in the world from waking and sleeping. But really, for me, it is a way of defining time. Reality is time and memory is time. Before I go on, if you don't mind, I would like to take a moment to thank a few people, though, here, because this was a really remarkable opportunity for me. The rooms that were made available to me to show the work here are a remarkable gift to see some of my aspirations come to reality. There are a couple of people who are not here today who have helped me from time to time to make sure that we were able to make the work. Drake Zimmerman and Jan Elfline. They have been patrons for quite a long time who have given me whatever kind of support and encouragement I needed for various projects. Bill and John and Everly, Dan, Harry, could not have been more sensitive to my attempts to explain how I wanted to present the work. And I think what's important, and I will come back to the nature of dreams, because what I think is important about their sensitivity to that is that I don't know what I want. And that's critical to me. Those words are very meaningful to me. I think the element of doubt, the elements of uncertainty and hope really do have elemental kind of influence over my decisions. I say that because I think uncertainty is, for me, a condition that means rising and falling is what we're required to endure on whatever the journeys we choose to take may be. And it's continuing that matters to me. So I don't see anything in terms of a beginning, middle, or end. So dreams and waking often, for me, are compressed, and the nature of the subject matter in Boy, for example, is more or less a compilation of the idea of youth and boyhood, in my case, but also a way of encompassing within that an awareness of my father, my sons, everyone else's father, everyone else's sons in literature, film, art, and most importantly, in the simple encounters we have day to day. Because my work, if you want to know where the process begins for me, always goes from the specific to the general. So everything I do is a consequence of responding to something that is always immediately right in front of me. And everything I do after that violates what's immediately, directly right in front of me, or in some way or other manipulates and enhances it.
What was in front of you immediately for this recent body of work that you've done around boyhood and youth? What were the things that were sparking you to really address this subject matter, which is so kind of classical in so many different kinds of art and literature, but that you've kind of inflected with your own voice?
I think I can actually answer that without saying I don't know. I do think it's not too intrusive to tell you that I met Bill right after I had a stroke and he had a heart attack. In my case, I recommend it. It was great. I had a minor stroke. It was perfect. Kind of straightened everything out fixed everything that was all bad in me. If you have have one like I did. It resulted in a certain sense of urgency and clarity that hadn't really prevailed in my ability to make choices before. And to share that with Bill, who had a similar, rather traumatic experience, gave me an opportunity that I hadn't really had before either. I decided to allow myself, to give myself permission to gather my remaining sense of what the future might be into a collection of stories that all came from my story, the narrative of boyhood, and as I said, evolved into the story of everyone's boyhood, everyone's youth, everyone's childhood. But that extends into also fatherhood. In other words, I guess I was focused on youth because I had become old. And I don't say that with any kind of apology or regret. In fact, it's much easier for me to be old than it was to be young. So, there's no melancholy aspect to that for me. I began to feel that I could somehow come to terms with the central themes of all my work, which were opposition and conflict, by acknowledging the experiences that had shaped my responses to all of those, which meant that the idea of boy, I was seeing, I was seeing all of the life in my own sons, for example. And as I said, manipulating the difference between imagination and reality along the way. So this field hat on this boy was a steak and shake paper hat. On my little baby boy, Pablo. But it was also the field hat on the soldiers who returned home from Korea when I was a boy. It was also the field hat, which was the only hat that my father had when he came to this country in 1909, I think. He was a kid from Sicily. I think what I hope you can take from that is that, and we saw this in the movie last night as well. There's a point at which, even though I internalize all of my experience, I suppose what makes me an artist is to find the courage to share how that feels inside, and as it's expressed, I create, as I said, new thresholds for myself and for the viewer. I think it requires a choice that's by you, the viewer, that's equal to mine, as the one who makes those thresholds.
It's beautiful. I think what you just said right now, in the latter part of your answer, kind of involving the viewer, I think that's a very kind of cagey and brilliant move that, especially kind of, I think of like modernist literature, like modernist artists who are involved beyond just what they are writing textually, and that there's an attempt to reach out as well to the active viewer who is able to piece together the kind of busy montage that they put on the page of like life. I think of Joyce or Virginia Woolf in that kind of sense. And right now we were just talking about the text in the other room of Boy, the parts and in 4 parts, and you said something really interesting, which was this idea of that went back to your not knowing where this came from, and yet you were able to kind of clearly kind of delineate not only the sources of the text where they came from, but also the reasons why a certain word would be removed as and another word would be substituted or suggested. So I wonder if you could talk about uncertainty, which is kind of related to dreams, but this principle of, you just said that your work is involved with like conflict and oppositions.
Yes.
As much as there is there's an uncertainty, there is also, right, the certainty that perhaps occurs when you are working and you are creating the work. And, you know, in this state, I would say it's so clearly, and I think productively unfinished, because you let the viewer kind of finish it in their minds. So I wonder if you could talk about that, like maybe uncertainty or certainty as a pole, one of these oppositional poles, and how you wrestle with them or how you work with them, if it's wrestling even.
I think the idea of conflict and opposition are central to everything in my work, because that is essentially what I mean by internalizing my experience. The words make believe. If you think of it, you know, we are so accustomed to that kind of idiomatic expression. We take it for granted. But if you think about it, and if you think about it in literal terms, and literalism is another thing we should talk about, because I am not an illusionist. If you look at my drawings, they look like I slept on them. I'm not an illusionist. I don't create space. I create images that are like words. They are signs and indications of something for you to respond to. But make-believe is an interesting combination of words that we have assumed were something child-centric, something for children, which, if you'll forgive me again, in terms of Boy and in terms of a recollection of youth, I think it's incredibly necessary for us not to let the child in ourselves go, not to let that child in ourselves be a part of our present, be a part of our who we are to anyone else, to someone else. The idea that we can create a new reality, a believable reality, out of something that comes from our imagination, is probably the definition of my role as an artist. And so that sense of doubt becomes important and central to me, because I don't know if I have ever achieved the elevation of faith, the ability to know anything is boring to me, because it simply assumes that you see what's in front of you, but interpreting that as something meaningful and impactful to me, to ourselves, requires accepting the conditions of doubt and uncertainty in order to achieve belief. My obligation to you is to do everything I can to give you the opportunity to choose to believe something that you see. Now, please, this is not a disclaimer in any sense, because I mean everything I say. I just don't believe everything I say. There is a quote by D.H. Lawrence. Bill knows this well, because it's in my studio right as you enter, along with James Joyce, the 3 conditions of dramatic art, all that. It's every artist tells a story. never believe the artist. Always believe the story. And by that I mean, it requires you, the viewer, the audience, to define the meaning of the experience. It isn't an experience until it's yours, which is why it's this kind of explanation, self-explanation, has always seemed difficult and false to me, because I think I've become very chatty.
I think there's a huge burden, perhaps, that is expected, that has always been kind of, especially of modern artists, to kind of have to explain their work. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about, especially the presentation here, is just that you're letting the work kind of breathe on its own, as if it's a living organism, and not needing to have to explain it. It's a principle that I think kind of exists also in so much of the best cinema, whether you're looking at Robert Bresson's films or the film that we saw last night. It's this sense of leaving out, purposely putting in gaps so that you are able to complete the work inside your imagination.
Well, that's perfect, because those silences, you're calling the gaps, those silences are the intervals, I think, that define time. And one of the things the Boy series is about is the nature of time as it's defined by memory, and the inconstancy of that, the evanescence of memory as it erodes and disappears and alters. But there is some, I mean, like I said, I feel a little chatty. I would really like to address something that you and I talked about, and it is about this. In terms of the movie last night, the two elements that struck me as central, and also central to our conversation here and with this work, were first, language, just because there is language in these, and I can explain that if you're interested. I thought I was a really good writer as a boy, even though I'd really never read a book, and no one had ever read a book to me. But when I learned that I could just make things up, it was liberating. So I grew up assuming I was a really good writer, and I didn't realize I was a really shitty writer for a long time. It took a very long time, and at that point, the things that I was making, the stories that I was telling, evolved from a kind of prose poem with illustrations on the border, because I had discovered the Lindisfarne Gospel, William Blake, illuminated manuscripts in general, and because I think at that point there was an interest in the combination of text and the visual arts as it was combined in what we now called illustrated fiction, I think. But at any rate, the turning point in the movie last night was when the main character spoke. It was when when I forget the doctor's
Dr. Traves, Frederick
Dr.
Traves.
Traves realized that he could speak. There was immediately the bridge had been provided for them to somehow find a way to one another and to acknowledge what the whole movie was about, which was humanity. It was that quality in us that confirms that we are human. So if I can segue back to the boy series, it's from the first time you're told you're loved, from the first time you're told you're not loved, to the next time you're told you're loved, to the next time you're told you're not loved. The words themselves confirm the feelings that you experience. And in that movie last night, it was when the words began to be a part of the experience of how they could interact. And it doesn't matter, I'm going to talk about D.H. Lawrence again. He once wrote about a character, I think this was in Lady Chatterley's Lover. He was trying to get this poor gardener to say something. And he took 3 pages to, just over and over and over trying to get it right. And finally he just said, he said what he wanted the gardener to say. And I said, you can't do that. I mean, you really can't do that. That's just an authorial intrusion. You have to be able to write it, but you don't. Because the point is that what we all want is to hear one another and to be heard. And it's the effort to speak that makes that happen. The other thing about the movie that I think is pertinent to what we're here for, why we're here, it was the mirror. It was the mirror. I think as an artist, my role is to be the reflection. It's not exactly true in the same way for every artist of every genre, but I do think the mirror was the most powerful element, and combined with language, reminded me of what my role as an artist. There's another quote by Rilke, as we experience the world in decline, that's the preface to it, we must be a ringing glass who trembles as we ring.
I see, especially hearing you speak right now, I'm reminded of the red orb. That's the center of the other sculpture in the other room. And I'm starting to see that as well, as almost perhaps that the boy is staring into the orb. Initially my thought actually went to another film that I was thinking of pairing, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The black monolith that is supposed to be the bank of knowledge by which all of humanity starts to understand itself. But of course, in that film, it leads to such horrendous kind of violence and the race to kind of better this culture over that culture. Versus there, I thought it was like kind of like a nice reversal where it was like the monolith in your version is like an object of play, and an object of like kind of nostalgic. Even though your work is, I wouldn't consider it nostalgic, that there is some element of nostalgia tied into that red ball. But now I'm sort of seeing it as like, with its shiny gloss, like a mirror as well. That it's like the boy trying to see some version of either himself at this age or some future version of himself, and just kind of being confronted with something that creates that kind of gop on his face. But I wonder if we could talk more a little bit about the mirror, like the idea of it, because it's such a potent psychoanalytic also image, in the sense of you looking in the mirror and you looking into a mirror and thinking that image inside the mirror is you, even though it might not be.
I will do that. But first, I have a lot of miles on me. And one of the things I do know is that I love people that I think are smarter than me. So if you see some mystery and magic in the red ball, I am definitely not going to discourage you from some. But again, remember what I said earlier about literalism. I don't try to create illusions. I don't try to create mystery. I think it's real. I think it's a part of our lives. You also remind me of something else in this, and it's our references to myth and modern beliefs and strategies of artists. And one of the things that I think I did realize 7 years ago, and I have a very good friend, Kurt White, who's a writer, and he a little bit, he's ahead of me. He's been, in terms of awareness, and younger artists influenced me a great deal during those those years of COVID when we were, unable to exhibit or travel to exhibits or see. Younger artists were at that point emerging because they were so much more comfortable using the resources that were available to them, which were essentially digital. And so I was learning in a way that I had never learned before because I had no choice but to familiarize myself with the way that these images and information was being shared. And one of the things that my friend Curtis and I talked about a lot was, and I guess I'm coming back to this idea of myth and magic, is the limitations of my understanding of aesthetic qualities, because they are so limited and defined by my experience as a Western artist, as a part of the material world that has shared in a certain undeniable kind of dominance in terms of the way beliefs are disseminated and canonized. I think younger artists have demonstrated that they are fearless when it comes to content that is derived from a much more global sense of beauty. Think of Nick Cage. There's just a lot of Nick Cave. I'm sorry. There's a lot that I was learning, not from direct experience, but because I couldn't experience many things directly. I was experiencing more things. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad, and it doesn't matter because it was what it was. But nevertheless, one of the things I feel now is to embrace that part of myself that refuses to accept the conditions of purely Western beauty. And at the same time, because I'm more or less attracted to opposition, not to be afraid of it either. So I can go to Rome and I can see all these broken noses and think, oh my God, this sense of decay is there's a certain tender, raw beauty to all this that I do embrace in my own work by spraying over, erasing, scraping, stratifying. So.
I'll be very interested to hear what you think of the two films we'll be showing later today, which are precisely in opposite to last night's film, which is an American-British film. One is from Japan. The first is from Japan, and the second is from Iran. So
I was just trying to give you the opportunity to
plug those afterwards, after the talk. No, but it's great it's wonderful to hear you say that, because I think I think you're cognizant of so many of these things because you're focusing in on the idea of myth and the idea of the stories that create a particular culture. And you can always go back to myths, as the Tale of the Princess Kaguya kind of demonstrates, that it's a kind of myths. I mean, what are myths? They're kind of explanations of people to themselves, another mirror perhaps, of where they came from and where they might be going. And so I think that I don't know if you would say that these works are kind of the creation of new kind of myths, as it were, or like where you see this kind of, like the relationship between story, narrative, and your work as well. Earlier you mentioned that you saw them as kind of shards or as kind of pieces from a story,
Yes.
and it's especially kind of reflected in the presentation of the two side by side drawings of like kind of like the show horse and the young boy.
Yes.
That it seems like they're going to suggest they suggest a continuity by their proximity, but there might not be a continuity, but they definitely come from somewhere specific.
And of course, all that's true. In other words, there's a reason they're not drawn together on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is, very much pertinent to another, I think, topic that we should probably at this point refer to, and that is inclusiveness. And I don't mean that in any political sense. What I do mean is how much should I concern myself with the perception of what I'm doing? Because let's be as frank as we can about that. I think it borders on sentimentality. I think there is a certain argument to be made for these possessing a certain rude charm. I don't think that's particularly fashionable. I don't think that it makes the perception of what one might consider to be provincial. Now, we began this by saying I'm a local artist, and I very soon after that introduction informed you that for me the boundaries of my personal world are that door. It's the threshold that we each pass through on a regular basis. I don't know where I'm from. I don't know where I'm going. I don't mean to diminish the significance of how everything has influenced me, but I do mean to suggest that over time one learns the world's big. And the power of one's imagination, since we're in a museum, is never something one should underestimate in terms of how it defines our response to our experience. So I don't feel like we need to be constrained by how I describe the result of my choices. I think it extends beyond that to what I've been willing to share. And I'm looking forward to actually the movies I've read about this morning seem to suggest everything that I'm trying to do in terms of fragmented line, in terms of the dissonant story, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I would love to. Perhaps I don't know how much time we have left. Maybe I could ask one more question, and we can wrap up and head to the film. But I think hearing you kind of speak also right now made me think we were so focused on this kind of your current body of work, which
yeah.
it's so wonderful to see this, but I think also just perhaps in your own words, kind of giving people a sense of, if you see this current state in your life or in your career, if that is an opposition to what you were doing before? Because you've had a very illustrious, long career before this, like work in terms of working, in terms of a body of work that could. So do you see itself like between, you know, the boy Nicolas Africano and the Nicolas we're seeing now, that kind of earlier kind of, I'm thinking like even like 70s, 80s, 90s, like the work that you were doing versus what you're doing in the 2020s now? Like, is there an opposition there?
I will tell you plainly, I don't think I'm good at what I do. And by that, I don't mean, again, to apologize for that. Everything for me is due to the virtue of labor. But I think that labor has resulted in the ability to make certain decisions that in the end allow me to be more articulate about what I can recognize that occurs. So, for example, I believe that my modeling is always a bit brutal. It's tender and raw, and never preoccupied with anything as limiting as the truth. My early work was based on desire. It was simply just the desire to speak. It was essentially knowing that if I could create an image that could at least be recognized as a dog, it might remind you of a dog. If I could. Now, I am not trying to be evasive in any way I do always feel like I'm one of the least educated people in any room because I believe in learning on a continual basis. But I was never an arduous or dedicated student. I was only selfish and passionate about my own ambition, my own aspirations. So I do think right now I'm doing the work that I have always hoped I would do. I think for the last 7 years, perhaps. I don't mean to disparage anything that I did during the time, all those years and decades before, but I think that needs to be put into a proper perspective as well. I think I reached a point, I stopped painting in the late 1990s, maybe early 20. I stopped painting because I didn't love my paintings. I thought my paintings were only paintings of my paintings. Now I draw and paint again because I can only show you certain things by drawing and painting them. So I have found a way to draw and paint in a way that I think is authentic, and in a way that I think is in some fashion new to me. I have always, as I said earlier, felt that my work was literal to the extent that much of it was in relief, much of it was applied, much of it was collaged and painted, much of it was built, and then much of it was scratched into surfaces. Much of it was written on, written over. And now I think I have found a narrative to which I can apply all those various ways in which I learned to express those thoughts and feelings.
It's wonderful. We've much to learn from you, Nicholas, I think, especially. You say that you don't know, but it's you know, I would contend a great deal, and I feel like just being in conversation with you, I feel like the wisest know how little they know and how much more there is to know.
I agree with that. I feel dumber than ever. And I do totally agree with you. But I also do want to put my own personal history into some perspective for you, and particularly for you, because I think you come from a generation that we need desperately right now. And I think I benefited from being present at a moment in time that was a transition from an agreed upon aesthetic that had found a marketable representation. And I benefited from that brief moment in time when what I was doing was an answer to what had become too familiar. For one reason or another, and in some cases for very personal reasons, I withdrew. I withdrew from what in some ways seemed to me like the falseness of that world. And I think I retreated into a kind of art that was self-indulgent. And again, remember, never believe the artist. I'm telling you what I really think is true, but I'm only telling you what I think is true. So I don't care about wisdom, and I don't care about advice, and I don't care about how my experience may inform a younger artist. I really care about the sharing of honest aspirations, of your hopes and dreams, not being afraid. And I think that's what younger artists are very good at right now. And I'm listening. I mean, I mean that. I'm listening. So.
I'd like you to raise a round of applause, please, for Nicolas Africano. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.